Welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast. We are glad you're with us. What is it like to become a pilot in your 40s and 50s? The challenges are unique for those of us in midlife, but so are the rewards. Hosts Ben, Brian, and Ted talk learning to fly, growing as pilots, and the joy of flying to destinations. The purpose of the podcast is not to teach, but to share knowledge and experiences of being a midlife pilot. Join the Midlife Pilot community and listen in every week. We are not CFIs or particularly intelligent, so if you want to learn how to fly, talk to anyone else other than the hosts of a podcast. Even this intro was too challenging for us, and we used a robot to do it. Okay, checklists are complete. Let's get the show started.
Hello and welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast, episode 111. This is where we share our experiences and challenges of flying in midlife. Whether you're a seasoned pilot, training for a rating, or just thinking about getting started in aviation, we like to think of the podcast as your aviation companion and your weekly dose of aviation inspiration. My name is Ben. I'm a pilot with an IFR rating and a commercial certificate based in the metro Atlanta that used to be snowy area. It's all gone now. Flying a Cessna 182, we like to call the Beast. And joining me tonight, as always, and I'm thankful for it, first of all, we have Brian, our private pilot in Nashville, which is home of the Bachelor at Super Charlie. He's flying a Cherokee 180 we like to call Lucy. Good afternoon or evening, I guess it is for you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. And super excited to be here tonight. I'm excited about the topic tonight. I'm excited about some of the news that we have. I'm excited about a lot of things. So yeah, glad to be here and glad the snow is pretty much gone.
Yeah, amen to that. Also joining us from the West Coast, our sport pilot extraordinaire, Ted, who is flying a Flight Design CTLS we like to call the Egg. Good generic time of the day to you, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing very good, thank you.
Yeah,
not a lot of flying here lately, but you know, it's been a little chilly here, and it's been a little icy here.
Yeah, we didn't get any snow. We just have rain and mud. But I'll take that over snow or fire. I saw some pictures of Georgia and Tennessee and a lot of places like that with snow, and it was cool to see. And
yeah, I've had one or two opportunities that actually could have gone up and flown, but we rescued a 4-month-old black lab puppy on Thursday. And by the time the weather cleared out and there were new daddy duties involved after the dog came into the house. And I think if I abandoned those duties, I would have been sleeping in the crate with the dog.
And we know that dog is Snowflake.
You know that dog is Snowflake. However, the rest of the family knows her as Olive.
Yes.
Olive.
Like the Kalamata olive. But yeah, I wanted to name her Lainey for my Skylane, and that got like vetoed without hesitation by everybody in the family. So I was a little bitter about that, but you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I had a cat.
Celebrity endorsements.
Yeah. I had a cat who was the boy named Sue. And I tried to have a cat that was the dude. I was outvoted on that one. So
Did the dude abide?
He very much abides. Yes.
Nice.
Well, I got to fly.
Yeah.
I want to hear about it.
Oh, it just, is in an airplane. It's great.
Wait a minute. I remember seeing those pictures on Instagram, and you should give Brian a follow on Instagram. Remind us your handle.
It's just Brian.Siskind. But yeah, so we wanted to see. I just love how everything looks. And these are all of our Midwest friends and Northern friends and all this. They think that we are losers for this, but I understand. But for us, it's still novel. I wanted to go see what the landscape looked like when it was snowy, but it's in that sweet spot between, can I get to the place? Can I get to the hangar? Can I get to the plane? Can I get the plane out? And before it's gone. And we made it up there, and at the airport in Bowling Green, it was our hangar is on the dark side of the moon. And so on the opposite lane or side of that row of hangars, it looks like a different season, across the way. And everybody's coming and getting their planes out, and it's a beautiful day. Just heading right out. It took me probably a good 45 minutes to get all the 1 inch thick ice, because the water runs off of the melt runs down and then refreezes. And so that's really the problem. But
our northern friends don't really get that and there's some truth to the fact that Southerners don't know how to drive on snow. But at least here in Atlanta, I know it's probably the same where you are. Most of the time, the snow is blanketing 3 inches of ice.
That's right. It's an illusion.
And it is. And so
I was able to get the plane out, though, and we were able to. It was interesting too. It was such a neat experience having an airplane, right? Because now we're in search of snow-covered landscapes.
Yeah,
but they are not here. But we have an airplane, so we go up, and then you just kind of look around. You're like, oh yeah, I can kind of see more off to the east here, northeast. So let's go that way, and then only flew for about 15 minutes, and it was a winter wonderland. So it was great. Had a great time. Took pictures. Did a little approach over this runway at Litchfield, spelled Leitch, Litchfield. Can't remember the identifier. It's Mike something, but did a little approach. I was actually intending to go there and land, and just to go see, like, oh yeah, nobody's landing here. It was neat, just seeing how the sun was refracting off of the melt of the runway and all of that. There's just so many interesting visual things that were happening, and flying over these ponds where they were cracking from the middle, and they almost looked like almost like a cornea, or an eyeball or something. There was just a bunch of really interesting visuals and things that were going on. So I had a great time, great flying, did a bunch of landings also, did a bunch of power off 180s and a bunch of partial power landings, putting in, say, just locking it in at 1500 RPM and just saying, okay, I can't touch it all the way to touchdown. And just trying to see how that was all working. It was great. I did two power off 180s, Ben, that were completely to commercial standard, absolute greasers, right on the 1,000-footers. I was feeling very good and very happy, and I was not recording, but I do have a witness, and so we'll get her on maybe to validate this at some point. But
you know what? As many of those that you do, I'd be a little bit disappointed if you didn't nail one or two of them.
Oh yeah,
you've said in the past, like, most of your landings are power off 180s.
It's kind of getting to that point, but I'm trying to mix it up. I think that there's such wouldn't you say there's a better chance in a way that you would end up with a partial power situation than a full on engine out? And so I'm really trying to pay special attention to that and trying to see how that shapes differently how I do things. What I really realized is it doesn't really change a lot.
Right.
If you're still treating it like, get to the runway, don't make haste. You're not worried about making a perfect pattern. Just get there. And in a Hershey bar, it's pretty hard to not go down. So, but it's just really had a lot of fun. Just a lot of fun. It was a great experience. And I love those flights where you just are with a friend and it's just, I don't know what's over there. I don't know. Do you want to go over there? Oh, let's go over there. Just like you're wandering around in the woods or something, it's just really fun.
Yeah.
Cool. What about you, Ted? Any flights?
Yeah. Well, first that's Mike 20 in Kentucky, Litchfield.
Mike 20.
And yeah, my experience with flying in the snow last year, or with snow on the ground last year, was it's the few feet of getting the plane out of the hangar. And then once it was that, everything's fine. Whether it's plowed or not, it's easy to move the plane around in the amount of snow that we get. And then, it's incredibly beautiful and cold temperatures. So great climb. I got up first time in 4 weeks that I've flown, and that was very nice. And I went down and had breakfast. It's my favorite meal to fly to is breakfast. And had a nice flight down there. It was really high pressure, and cool, not cold, but cool temperatures. And I was sitting there getting like 1,500 feet climb everywhere I was, whether I was in the air or just coming off the ground or whatever. And just so much fun. It's like, oh, let me climb over that cloud. Okay, I'm at 2,000. Oh, now I'm at 4,000. Just really quickly like that. And so it was a lot of fun.
Quick question. I'll just answer real quick. Our friend Lewis, our good friend Lewis,
Yes.
who was joined us at the Nashville fly-in. He's asking, Brian, do you keep a plane in Nashville that you fly up to Bowling Green to get your plane? That's really the next stage, right? Is like, what's a beater that I can tie down out here right by John Toon so that I can fly up to.
Here's the irony. Here's what I see what will happen. And I may do it the same way, but Brian one day is going to end up with a Cessna 140.
Oh, for sure.
But instead of keeping that at Toon, he's going to have that puppy in the hangar at Bowling Green, and he's going to use Lucy to go back and forth.
Exactly.
Oh, I'll tell you what, just a little side note. We're not going to get on this rabbit hole right now, but man, I'm starting to get a hankering for a Stinson Voyager.
Wow.
I just think, I don't know. It seems weird to be looking at any plane that doesn't have a motor in it that starts with, Lycoming or Continental, or in your case, maybe Rotax,
Yeah.
But there's a lot, 165 horsepower, 180 horsepower. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. They just seem cool. If anybody has a Stinson Voyager or knows somebody that has one, tell them to find me and give me a ride so I can check it out.
There you go.
And yes, I said hankering, Peter. That's right.
Yeah.
I was code switching for Ben so he would understand what we were saying.
Thank you.
I'm going to pick up Richard's comment here. He said, there was some poor guy at Manassas who had a wall of ice in front of his airplane, courtesy of the snowplows. There's nothing sadder than a pilot on a sunny day blocked from flying by an ice wall.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's brutal. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, quick thing. Obviously we're not sponsored by anybody because of reasons, but I just want to say that we bought the Twin Hornet heater for our plane, and it has been the lifesaver of this winter. It is the coolest thing. It self-regulates its temperature. You basically put it behind the propeller, put the cowl plugs in, and blanket over everything, and it'll take care of itself. And every time that I go get the plane, no matter what the temperature is, everything in there is 75 degrees, and it radiates heat all the way down. You just let it soak, and it's amazing, and they're not expensive. I've been very pleased, and it's made our winter. I mean, the startups are just it's so nice to not kind of, I don't know, cringe when you start the airplane when it's cold, a little bit. It's just been so smooth and just great. So, yeah.
So when I get in the plane now, I'm like, I'm so sorry, but here it comes.
Yeah.
I apologize to my engine. Wanted to hit a couple of an announcement and our events coming up. First of all, we want to give a major shout out to a friend of the show and a fellow podcaster. He's been appearing on the Airline Pilot Guy a fair amount, and Alpha Juliet, or as I am instructed to refer to him, Lord Alpha Juliet, has passed his commercial check ride.
All right.
So, crowd noise for him. He crushed it, as we all would have expected, but just wanted to say congratulations. The other big news, as if you didn't know from the last couple of episodes, but we're going to keep talking about it. We're really excited about the big Texas Send coming up May 2nd through the 4th in Gillespie County, or Fredericksburg, the city of Fredericksburg, Texas. Tango 82. We have reserved a block of rooms. I haven't gotten a status update, but according to one of our people in the chat who is attending, our friend Wendy is saying that she just got the last room in the block. There could still be rooms available. And then we also want to let you know that there's Airbnbs in Fredericksburg all over the place. And it's just a couple of miles away from the airport. So we want you to come join us and hang out with us for an amazing weekend. It's going to be the local VFW is having a big event there. So
bonus.
There's going to be a lot going on, but
a lot going on.
Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I just, we have our ticker running here. The audio audience is not going to see this, but we're running the numbers. We got a live ticker here, and it is wild. So we are now up to 40 RSVPs, 63 people, 33 airplanes. And so
and a partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah. I think that, and the event is, 4 months away. So we are very excited. We're also a little bit in this state of, okay, all right. So we may be having to work some more logistics, but don't feel like you can't come, or that we're that airport can hold a lot of planes and is used to dealing with a lot of people. And the hotel block being sold out does not mean that there's not rooms available. And the block rate is nice, but it's not, it's not like it's the room's half off or something. So, and honestly, they've been extending the block rate, I think, to people as a kindness as we continue to bring all this to them. So anyway, just we're just super excited, and we have definitely decided that we will be doing a live podcast recording episode event at this location. How, where, when? We haven't figured that out yet, but the good news is this is what it's all about, guys. It's about planning, right? We're 4 months out. We got time to figure this out. So anyway,
and if I could jump in real quick, to our audio listeners out there as well, and to our chat, the staff at the hotel has been completely awesome. And so their stated cancellation policy is 48-hour notice. But if you're flying in and it's IFR weather and you're a VFR pilot, they will allow you to cancel your room at no charge. They're super flexible people, and I can't wait to go out there just to meet them. They've been a blast to work with. They've been super welcoming. So, I mean, this really should be something special.
Yeah. And what just a neat place in general. So it'll be aviation, everything, aviation diner, aviation themed hotel, planes everywhere. So it'll be great. And I think that, we're going to have a lot of friends there of our own and people that are connected to us too. So it's just, everybody's our friend here, but you know what I'm saying? It's just going to be wild. So there's a lot more that's going to build. Stay tuned. Real quick, I'm going to hit the housekeeping if that's cool.
Great. Please.
So we are grateful for you guys all making this the best pilot community that we know of, a positive space where we share everything from training experiences, shared personal minimums, tackle ownership challenges, review flight plans, and best of all, make new aviation friends. You can connect with us. Join our Patreon community from $1 a month or do the one-time annual Patreon. Either way, 25 cents an episode or less. Access exclusive content, including check ride debriefs, killing zone conversations, and more on the Discord. We do have a fresh debrief from AJ's momentous check ride. So be sure to get into our Patreon and check that out. And thanks to One Dull Geek for hosting those and making those happen. And it's super valuable and entertaining, even if you're not looking to do that right now. It's not just for people that are on the verge of their own commercial check ride. I think you'll get a lot out of it no matter where you're coming from. And even Ben probably was, you probably figured out, wow, there's a bunch of stuff. How did I even pass my commercial check ride?
There was a little bit of that. I'm not going to lie.
So 10% supports Freedom Aviation Network's anti-human trafficking efforts. Watch us live on YouTube, Mondays, 8 p.m. Eastern. Share your stories at midlifepilotpodcast@gmail.com. We read all the messages, and you might even hear one on the show. For everything Midlife Pilot Podcast, community feedback, merch, dad hats, big text to send t-shirts, and more, visit midlifepilotpodcast.com.
Awesome. Thank you. There's been a few updates. Well, there's the Discord server, which is kind of the magic sauce of being a Patreon member. It allows you to, as Brian said, allows you to engage with the community. But Ted, why don't you give us an update on our new Patreon supporters and maybe a community spotlight?
Yeah. So I want to say thanks to our new Patreon members and our upgrades. We have Mike M and James F at the Landomatic level. And at the Hershey Bar level, we have James S. It's always fun to see people come in and see the new names and then see people roll into Discord as well. And speaking of Discord, I wrote down a couple of the notes this week of things that have gone on, and it's been very busy. This does not even cover a fraction of it. I think the number one thing in there has been snow and seeing pictures of not just airplanes and things from the sky, but also, people's houses and people's dogs, things like that. With the snow, it's been really fun to see. I like learning about people because of that. Charlie Golf Sierra shared pictures from their second Pilots and Pause mission. So that's always a highlight. And we have a new Discord section for aviation books. And, as requests get made and topics get repeated, then it's like, okay, this is something we need to cover and need to start collecting what are the books that we all love. So thanks, Brian and Mark, Wendell Geek, for kind of kicking that off and putting your notes in it at first. So it's always fun.
That's the great thing about the server too, and having the big shout out to Wendell Geek, who's plays a critical role in the maintenance of that server. But somebody throws something out there, well, hey, we need this. There's a gap here. We fill it immediately, and it gets used. So it's really cool to see how dynamic it is.
Yeah, people have a place to go. They can talk to Mark when they want to complain about Ben posting shirtless pictures needlessly in the vids and pics section, posing next to his ceramic coated.
You're driving listeners away as we speak. They're just dropping like flies. Don't tell lies. I know it's for fun, but now you're just making everybody throw up in their mouth.
We've theorized having a negative Patreon. You can pay money to get us to stop doing things, and that would certainly be on there. So
also wanted to give a shout out to our friend Nathan Ballard, who will be hosting a Mentor Live event coming up, and I'm looking for it in the chat.
I have it here.
It was January. I thought you had it pulled up. Sorry, Ted.
Yeah, it's third Wednesday. It's on using augmented reality and virtual reality in flight training. 8 p.m. Eastern on January 22nd. That's the third Wednesday. So January 22nd, 8 p.m. Everything virtual.
Yeah. So support him. Listen, I checked out my first Mentor Live event, and I mean, you can be a private pilot. This is, put on by CFIs for CFIs, but you don't have to be CFI to chime in on it. And I really do think that there's a lot to pick up on it. So check that out. Tonight, it's always fuel. That's what we like to say at in the Discord server. Whenever there's an announcement of an accident, our first thought is it's always fuel. But Ted, why don't you introduce the topic for us?
So I want to give the origins of that. When I was a student pilot, I read Killing Zone, our Bible, and I wrote kind of 6 notes to myself, or 6 rules. And number 1 is it's always fuel. That's not literally true. It's not. It's kind of hyperbolically the top thing. It's about the 4th or the 5th most common accident category. But for me, it's the one to really pay attention to. And so ever since then, I mean, there's a little bit of observation bias, but I notice it whenever I'm watching, crash analysis and seeing these things. And it's just like, I guess the thing about it is, it's the one thing that is almost completely avoidable and almost completely our own fault. And it's also something that I feel, and I have no stats to back this up, but that I feel we're vulnerable no matter how many hours we have. Whether you're a new pilot or you've been around the block a million times, if you're not paying attention to it, you have those problems. So it's, that's why I pay attention to it. And I did a search on Discord earlier today for the phrase, it's always fuel, to remind myself of when I say it and when other people say it. So, it's not to fault pilots that have gotten in a situation like that, but it's to learn from those. And, I would say that I'm really dumb and I need to make things as simple as possible and have as few ways that I can mess up in the air as possible. And so fuel is one of those things that I really pay attention to make sure I don't have any failures like that.
I've had maybe once or twice where I'm looking at my Cessna fuel gauges. And as a quick reminder, I've said this on the podcast before, the very first lesson that I've ever learned when I started my pilot training was, specifically in a Cessna, never trust a fuel gauge. Number one. And I've, since that point in time, I got to know my airplane very well, and I would go along cross countries and I would have some headwinds that would be maybe a little bit heavier than I thought they would be. And, you see them kind of leaning pretty far to the left, and it's, that sweat starts dripping down your temple and you start breathing a little bit more. And now I have 20 airports within gliding distance to me, but it's something that I was taking the family down to the east coast of Florida, New Smyrna Beach. When I got out of the airplane, I had about 18 gallons of fuel, which is slightly over an hour's worth of fuel. But looking at those gauges, it felt to me as if one of the tanks may have been on fumes. And it really, really caught my attention, and I have not forgotten it since. And I have an agreement with my brother-in-law, with the Beast. When we're done flying, it's topped off. Period. End of story. And so that way it's ready to go for the next person. But with my travels, I just don't see a reason to, especially if the fuel is cheaper than where it is at my home airport, which is quite often, just top it off. And weight and balance, I still do it, but it's not as a big of issue in our airplane as it is for a lot of folks. So there's really no excuse for me to be in that situation. But I can also, while saying that, I can see how others can get into that situation.
I think it was it just maybe even the last episode of Opposing Bases? Wasn't RH just talking about some of this, about just encouraging people to just top off your tanks. Just, you have way ridiculously more fuel than you need. You're up against weight and balance, obviously, considerations and all that, but just there's no reason to just not have fuel. So, yeah, I mean, I think in the Cherokee, you're a little bit more engaged with the act of fuel management in a tactile, process oriented way, because you're not just cruising along on both like you would in a Cessna. And so I do believe that while that can also lead to a lot of problems, and it certainly does, people forgetting to switch tanks, mismanaging tanks, all of that, there is something to be said. I think that I'm more fuel aware in the Cherokee than I have been in any kind of Cessnas or other planes. That said, I don't even look at the gauges, other than just to see that they quote unquote work. But they are definitely working at different sensitivities. So there's that. I do, some long hauls. I don't do TED type of flights, or I don't fly for, what are you talking about, 8 hours?
Yeah, 7.4 nonstop.
Is that your longest?
Yeah. 7.4.
See, I would go nuts. I would need to take a break, but I appreciate the sort of Apollo 11 nature of what you're doing.
Well, the one thing that I want us to consider, because we have listeners out there that have airplanes that have that may want to take 1, 2, or maybe even 3 passengers, and they can't carry full fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not quite the same as us, and so it seems like an easy problem to avoid, but it's also, I can see how people can get into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I guess part of the message here tonight is don't put yourself in that position where you're going to be thin on fuel.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially over longer trips too. You know, we've talked a lot about planning longer flights. I think that GPS contributes to some of these fuel incidents, because people are just in the VFR world. People are, there's a lot of just direct enter flying going on without thinking about, number one, having more outs to land, but also thinking about your route in terms of fuel. And just, there's no, for me, I like to stop. I like to see new places. I build that time in, but I think that what happens is people get into, over time, I suspect with more experience too, people get into their car driving behaviors, I think. And there's sort of I've seen it described as a sunk cost fallacy, and the idea that the further you get towards your destination, the more resistant you are to divert for fuel or anything. We're almost there. It's maybe a form of get there-itis. And so, and then there's also just the stress of I'm not very smart, and this is math.
Yeah.
So, what I do is I just leave incredibly wide margins and leave so much room for error that I don't even get close to there ever being an issue. I don't. Now we're not going to get into the low wing Army, high wing kind of argument here, but I will say, when I was training in a 172, the one time I had just read in the Killing Zone about how there was a fuel exhaustion accident with an instructor and a student because they had not checked the fuel caps after the full service fuel had been done. And I had just read that the day before, and I go into my lesson and the plane was in a different place. And there was a bunch of weird things timing wise going on. The truck was late and we were trying to get started with some stuff before the truck got there. I don't know. There's a bunch of weird distractions. Got in the plane, and like just that moment where and Ben, this is for you probably every time, where you get in the plane, you strap in, you're in the plane, you got all your stuff kind of organized, and then you realize the chocks are out there. You don't realize that sometimes, but
yep. Thanks for that. And AJ too. My Cox brother. You got to include him on that.
But there's that feeling when you're in the plane where you almost get haunted by nothing. Usually, right? What did I forget? This is what checklists are for. I'm doing all these things. Well, I had just read this. Me and my instructor got in the plane, and I realized that I had not checked the fuel, and he didn't catch it. And so I said, no, I need to go check the fuel. And then when I started to go do that, and I go up and I look, they had left one of the caps off.
Oh,
and
man.
So, I just thought, wow, gosh, that really does happen. You can't count on anybody. Make sure you're the last person to touch your fuel cap. And I love being in a low wing because when I get into when I'm strapped into the plane, and I start to have that sort of mental moment where I wonder, I did that right? Yes, I did that. Yes, I checked that. I can look, and ours, they have the little lines. You can see if it's even slightly loose from either side. But anyway,
just curious, how easy is it to check those chocks from inside the airplane?
Oh, well, in a Cherokee, you just don't use them.
Sorry, we're not making this a high wing, low wing, but
no,
you threw out the first volley with the chocks, but that's okay.
Shots fired. No, I mean, As far as I know, I don't even know if I have mains, or I don't even know if there is gear. I think it just is like a magic carpet ride.
Well,
Right.
I've got to say, it's one of the things that I feel spoiled with having a high wing is having the magical both selector on the fuel, so that I don't have to worry about switching tanks. And that is kind of one of those kind of top 5 examples of how you can take Ted and dumb Ted out of the equation. Because I don't have to worry about forgetting to switch tanks or anything like that. It's going to feed from both tanks. And so it's one less thing that I have to worry about, which I love.
I would counter that with, though, I burn on both for an hour, but the way our fuel system is set up, if there's any fuel left over after it goes through, not 100% of it gets burned up, it returns to the right tank. And you'll get if you fly for more than an hour, you'll get a decent imbalance. And so we'll start burning off the right until they even back out. And so, there are other aspects other than fuel exhaustion. I have had one time when I looked up and saw that the right tank was almost pegged on the full load, and the left side was below a quarter of the tank. And that kind of scared me. So yeah, of course I threw it over there. It got it balanced out okay, but not all the way by the time I landed. But it is something that we have to think about, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Was that when you were skywriting in West Virginia?
Yeah.
No. That was one of the times, though, that we was a 12-minute flight, 14-minute flight. I felt like I had enough fuel in there while the fuel was coming out.
Yeah.
But I still had that's why I got on a 7-mile left base.
That's right.
Make sure I had enough fuel.
This can be categorized. I kind of came up with 4 rough categories, and Killing Zone has their own version of how they categorize it. But Brian, you have the kind of stats out of Killing Zone. You have that handy?
I only have the ones that maybe you pulled out that I was yelling about earlier before we started. But I think it's
in the show notes. I can.
So these stats were from 2009.
Yeah.
So it's funny, by the way, that 2009 is so long ago now. How is this possible?
2009 is going to be driving this year.
Yeah. 2009 can almost vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, back in the olden times, there were some stats that we are referencing. This is somewhere between barnstorming and current day. Of the fuel accidents, 54% were fuel planning, which is running out of gas. 42% poor manipulation of the fuel system. And so,
I think it was like
4% was fuel contamination. So it's very rarely going to be fuel contamination, although that does happen. And make sure you check in your fuel every single time.
Yeah. So let's talk about what I call bad fuel calculations first, right? That's all the ways that you truly run out of gas. And there's, I think we've all got stories or memories of it. The one that I remember my DPE talking about was some people that did the same cross-country flight every time. It was a destination they went to every week, and they ran out of gas on one of them because there was headwind. And so we're used to thinking in terms of distance, not in time. Mm-hmm. And the engine is thinking in time. So that is a great example of how you can find yourself out of fuel in kind of a known situation even.
I have a quick story on that.
Yeah.
And it's not even general aviation. It was commercial airlines. We were flying up to Canton, Ohio, and we were on the radio. I forget the airport code, and I can't remember which. There's several airports in that area, and I can give it to you later, Ted, to put the show notes. But there was a Mexico Airways, a Mexican airline, that was on its way to Pittsburgh that landed at our airport. and this is, it was a Class Charlie. Actually, it may have been a Delta, but it had like a 6,500 foot long runway, maybe 7,000 foot, or maybe it was an old Air Force base. It was longer than that. I can't remember the details. But I remember hearing on the radio that these pilots were calling Mayday fuel. And then this was the closest airport they had to get down. And we had gotten out and was talking to somebody in the FBO, and I guess something had come through, but the winds affected their fuel calculations. And they were full of passengers. And they had to put this, I think it was MD-80. This was probably back 2019, 2018. This is while I was in training or just got my license. But yeah, I mean, it happened in the airlines.
Yeah. Yeah. We can find examples of it in all the crashes, basically, of people that run out of fuel for various reasons, right? And it can be as simple as too many hours, right? Like you have 7 hours of fuel and you tried flying for 8 hours, and that just doesn't work. It can also be the one that I think a lot of us are scared about, which is somebody else fuels the plane and you just assume that it's full and don't fully check it. I think there's a lot of those. I don't know how often that happens versus other things, but it certainly is the concern, is kind of the miscommunication of how much fuel is in the plane.
And again, anytime someone else is doing anything to the plane, that is, I mean, it shouldn't change anything anyway, but you are going to need to check everything with a very skeptical eye every time. I've had, and we all, I'm sure, have had many experiences like this where I can't tell you how many times I've said, yes, please top this off. I'll be back later. And if I hadn't have just checked, or I don't know, they didn't do the fuel at all, you know, or times where you say, even the inverse, you know, when you're really trying to watch your weight and balance and you have somebody filling up your plane and you tell them to do it to the tabs, the universal law is that 50% of the time they'll just top it off. So, you know, do your own fuel to avoid a lot of these scenarios. At the same time, I understand, and I take advantage of the convenience of it a lot to have somebody do it for me. But I've always done it myself a good bit, and you know, as much as I can. And I think that a lot of people that get in training are just so disassociated from fuel because they're in a training environment. The planes are just getting topped off by the trucks in many of these training environments and bigger airports or more metropolitan areas, at least. And you just, I don't know, it just doesn't enculturate you into being a part of that process and checking for things. And yes, you're going to sump the fuel and you're going to, you know, but those things can get missed. So, yeah, training, I think is the time to start forming good habits about that. And I've never had a passenger that is so anxious to get into the air. They would much rather see you doing extra things to make sure that everything is safe than being able to, you know, throw them in the plane and take off without doing those extra things. So check the fuel, do what you got to do. But, and then as far as en route, try to, I don't know, again, flight planning, try to think about everything does not have to be a straight line, in VFR flying. And so you can put yourself in a better position, and then ultimately just have crazy wide margins. Like just because the regulations say have these reserves, I don't know, double it, triple it. You have your own minimums. You can do whatever you want to do. You can fly 1 hour at a time if that's what you want to do. And yeah, that's the thing is, Ben RH's story was something about somebody that was, that got diverted for, it was like 45 minutes or something, where they got held or something. So, a lot of unplanned weird things can happen. And, you know, when I was out west and I was out flying from Marfa down to Big Bend, as much as it was me pressing the bounds of the performance of the airplane and density altitude and having 2 passengers, I opted for full fuel. I did the calculations, of course, but yes, my ground roll was 3,000 feet. And it was a
like
little
9,000 DA. Yeah.
It's a little unnerving,
Yeah.
but you know what I was not unnerved about? I had plenty of fuel to go all the way down towards Mexico and all around. There's not a lot of strips or places to get fuel. And when you get out into these remote places where there's no radio, there's no radar, there's no nothing, there's no ATC coverage, then you really are kind of on your own. And so you need to start stacking up the resources you have to be in your favor, to where if you have an issue, you can just get back. And not, when it's remote enough, you just can't expect the fuel's going to be working, or even that the reporting about the fuel's going to be accurate, or that the fuel itself will be good. So I don't know. Sometimes you got to stack it up. You got to everything's Ben. You're always really quick to remind us that aviation is all trade-offs. Sometimes you are going to have to push the bounds of maybe your plane's performance to put yourself in a better place. Because I knew that we were going to burn off a lot of that fuel while we were en route for a couple of hours or whatever. Right. So I would just rather be in the position of just being loaded up. I could have easily spared myself the stress of the takeoff and just be like, you know what? I'll just do it to the tabs, but then all of a sudden I've got, more than 2 hours less fuel. So
a couple of things on that, and I want to get to a couple of comments. I think here on the East Coast, or even east of the Mississippi, and we can also say the same thing on the West Coast, but there are areas of the country where you're a long way away from fuel, and that you really need to take a few extra measures to make sure that you're fuel planning properly. Here in Georgia, it's hard to fly 50 miles without passing an airport that has fuel. So that's one thing. And I don't want us to take that for granted, because there are sections of the countries where the airports are more sparsely populated. We got a couple of comments that I wanted to catch. One of them from Richard K. The nice thing about the newer GPS linked EIS, engine information systems, is that they can account for the wind and let you know how much fuel you'll have at destination. And you can apply that to your electronic flight pads, whether you're using ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot. The thing about it is, they may not be precise on their forecast of what your head or tailwinds are going to be, but guess what? They're going to be close enough. Well, if you're planning for an hour reserve, or if you're IFR and you're planning for an hour and a half reserve, if they're off by 2 or 3 knots, it's not going to make that big of a difference in your reserve planning. It's close enough work that they're providing for you. So don't take those tools for granted. The other message that I saw earlier, let's see, from Peter L. Switch tanks was missing from my training. I realized the importance when I parked my plane on the slope and lost half a tank. Realized that a missing gas cap would cross feed and lose all of it. We do study fuel systems in private training, and it varies from aircraft to aircraft, low wing to high wing. I get all that. But, there's these things that we learn after we get our ticket that really kind of bring it home for us. So
also,
thanks for sharing that.
Hey, Ben, have you ever been in a situation where you had less fuel than you really preferred to have?
Yes. And to the point, Terry was flying with me and she noticed my nervousness, and we've flown a lot together, but it was, I think one of it was the trip down to New Smyrna Beach. The other was down to Fernandina when I took her down there for her birthday. And it was a lot stronger winds than we expected. Now, when I went to Fernandina, we had 25 gallons left. That's getting close to 2 hours worth of fuel. Yeah. But I'm looking at those fuel gauges, and they were both showing at like the quarter. I just didn't have a lot of faith in what was actually being shown. And after I landed, I was like, we had 2 more hours of fuel left. It was fine. But I was in kind of in warning mode. I was in DEFCON 3.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say is that I think just imagine what that feeling is. If you find yourself a little lazy or not doing quite the planning that you should be doing, then just imagine yourself in that situation with somebody you care about, up in the plane. You encounter some situations that you didn't encounter or didn't intend to encounter, and you've got twice the headwinds that you were forecast, and then now ATC is vectoring you to some, I don't know, and there's an incident at the airport. Now you got to divert over here. Things can stack up. Imagine you are in some situation with a dear person, and you've got to explain to them right before it happens what's about to happen, and that, I'm sorry, honey, the engine's going to stop running. And and she's going to say, well, how do you know that? And then you're going to have to explain why you know that. So anyway, there's that. And then also just, I feel like that there's always going to be reasons to sort of shirk details. Just don't shirk the details. Stay honest with yourself about what you're doing and the gravity of what you're doing.
Yeah, you definitely don't want one more distraction. And my kind of rule when I do the fuel planning is always do a stop, basically a half tank stop, right? And the idea is that when I stop for fuel, if they don't have fuel, that shouldn't be a deal breaker for me. That shouldn't be ruining my trip. And that's always the concern, right? Is that you go somewhere and you thought that their pumps were working and their card reader is down, or they're out of fuel, or whatever it is. And so that's always the extra that I try to include in my planning. Is that concern.
Before we pivot, can I just say one quick thing? Ben, as an instrument pilot, you're the only instrument pilot on this panel of mediocrity. I find it fascinating that all you're told for instrument training is to trust your instruments. But in this world, it's trust your instruments except for your fuel gauges.
Well, I could wax poetic about this for the next hour and a half.
Okay.
It's all about the source of the data.
Yeah.
And you have corks and you have things floating around in the tank that's going to be moving constantly and can provide a reliable piece of information. Whereas your pitot tube or your pitot-static system is going to provide you very precise information. So I do see the juxtaposition there, but trust everything but the fuel gauges.
Okay.
But I think you are also trusting it, but verifying. Because if all of a sudden you saw your gauges saying empty, you're not going to discount that. You're going to trust that is actually telling the truth and figure out why that is.
And I'm going to look out the back of my wing and see if I'm skywriting.
Yes. Dusting for mosquitoes.
Yep.
So the next major category is what I kind of summarize as fuel starvation despite fuel. And that, I don't know, it's more embarrassing, I think, because you actually have fuel in the plane and yet you come down, but it's the same problem, right? Either way, the engine stops and the plane gets very quiet. So that's, and I think that's why there's almost as many cases of that as there are from actual fuel planning. There's, and that's, I looked up to make sure I remember when it was, but there was a case in May 2024 in Spokane, and where they put a training plane onto a freeway under construction, and they immediately said that it was an engine stoppage, and like, oh, that's not what that was, and it came out within a day or two later that I think that the news said that the pilots discovered that there was another fuel tank, which is quite the interpretation of not realizing that you're on the wrong tank. Yeah. So, I think there's enough of those cases that it's probably good for us to pay attention to in our emergency flows. to not forget that. And despite having a both selector that I use 90% of the time, that is on my flow. It's on my flow, my pre-landing flow. It's actually on my every 30 minutes, check the fuel and the actual physical fuel gauges flow.
It's startling. It's startling in your videos, Ted, because that's behind you, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It's between the seats. Yeah.
So when I watch one of your videos, I've been watching the back of your head for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden it's like a jump scare.
Yes. Yes. And I do that so that I'm always in the habit of doing it. And also so that I don't forget that I've switched to running off just one wing. And it's easy to say, oh, this is a low wing problem. This because you have to be selecting tanks, but it can be, you heard Ben say, and I do it too, which is you run off one wing, even if you have the option of running on both. And so it's just as easy to forget that you did that. The engine stops and you never turn around and look at that selector. So that to me is why that's really critical. And it's hard for me to imagine someone like Mark who has 4 tanks, because it's just, I have trouble with one tank or 2 that are joined together. So having 4 to choose from and monitors is a lot more work.
So I can cover that. One Dog Geek puts in our comments, flying IFR, I need to remind myself of what the different levels of fuel emergency are that airliners use when talking to ATC. I know of a few. First is min fuel or minimum fuel, which is telling ATC, I have enough to get to the airport, but not much more beyond that. So don't vector me around. It's kind of their way of saying I need to be direct to the numbers. And then there's emergency fuel, which is I'm going to run out of gas here in a second. I need to get down as soon as humanly possible. So those are the 2 that I know of. One Dog Geek. But
the other thing that if I ever become an airline pilot for some reason, I'm definitely going to pull the student pilot card, student pilot United.
Yeah. Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Heavy. Yeah.
Yeah. United 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 student pilot.
First solo. Yeah. Bingo fuel. Yeah.
Oh, that would be great to hear on frequency.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
So,
Bit Shifter in our comment, somebody brought up the term bingo fuel, and bingo fuel is just enough to return to base. So it means you can't continue whatever mission it was that you were on. So, those are the different fuel status. The other thing that we wanted to talk about, I believe, if y'all are ready to move on to the next area, is fuel contamination. And this is one that, it's if it's water in your gas tanks, that's an easy one to resolve. Always sump your tanks, especially after you just get fuel.
Yeah. There's always that concern about jet fuel, especially people that have turbos, apparently tend to get confused with being a turboprop on what fuel type they take. I try to, if I've got a truck coming, I try to read what it says on the side of the tank, but I don't watch that super close. I am very concerned about water in the fuel, both especially after fueling and after the plane has been overnight on the ramp.
Well, I'll tell you, there's been about 2.5 inches of snow on top of the wings of the Beast over the last 3 days. So my next flight, you can rest assured that I will be sumping everything thoroughly.
Yeah. And people underestimate the value of really good seals on your fuel caps, and those need to be actively evaluated, looked at, maintained, kept well, because that is how water gets in usually. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that goes into what I kind of add as the wild card 4th category, which is fuel loss in flight. So speaking of those seals, which the seals are good for being on the ramp and not getting rainwater in or snow in. But to me, that's a real concern in flight. I don't know. I hope everybody's thought through what it does to their fuel calculations. And what I mean by that is if you're using a fuel totalizer and you say you've got 70 gallons and you're doing 10 gallons an hour, that doesn't mean that there's actually 70 gallons in the tank just because it dipped that when you took off, because it's not aware of anything that changes in flight. So that's always one thing to kind of be aware of. And that's why I'm really happy that I've got two ways to check it. I've got a totalizer and I've got a physical fuel gauge. I can see the level of actual fuel in my tank. And when I say gauge, I mean it's a tube. So it's exactly how much fuel's in the tank. So having that cross check is really nice. But you've got a fuel totalizer, even with the terrible Cessna gauge, it still tells you if there's fuel in the tank.
And we do use it religiously, and we also check it as well. So I will, about every fourth or fifth flight, I'll see what the totalizer is telling me is left in the tanks, and then I'll go and use my gauge and stick it in there and see what my actual fuel totals are. And it's usually half a gallon to a full gallon difference, which is, okay, I'm all right with that. One of the things that I mentioned about this fuel loss and the fuel leaking, and this is what happened when at the 100th episode fly-in, and there was fuel coming out. Our friend Luke at Luke's Landing had commented that, hey, looks like you're skywriting. You got fuel coming out. And so we had just topped off at the airport. And, I just thought I was beating myself up for not checking the fuel caps. When we got on the ground, they were actually on, but there is a Allen screw in there that you can tighten or loosen the seals. And it has happened in the past where those screws just get over vibration over a period of time. They just get loose, and I haven't thought to check it. And so to credit the fuel line guys at the airport, they did put the caps back on, but those screws came loose and it was coming out because of a bad seal.
But the other half of that was that we fueled and had forgotten to sump. And so we sumped without even looking at the top of the tanks. We didn't dip the tanks. And so having that happen where it was skywriting like that, in that flight, we didn't know if the cap was off or on and right incorrectly. And
that's
so
correct.
It's one of those where it's like, this is an example of the Swiss cheese model where the holes don't line up. And it's a great reminder for all of us, right? Of why we have habits and why we have checklists and why we follow those routines.
We're all in agreement that yes, there was a screw loose. We do know that was part of the Swiss cheese model, but
yes.
But yeah, I mean, I would love for other people to send in to us their stories to back this whole topic up, because I think it's something to stay on periodically. You can email your tales of fuel. We won't call it starvation, fuel hunger games. I think
hunger. Yeah,
that was a great one.
Send us those midlifepilotpodcast@gmail.com.
Absolutely. So wrapping it up, just like Brian said, send us your feedback. When you hear of an aviation accident, you could be like us. It's always fuel, but definitely take some of these tips in mind. Again, we're not instructors. We're not mechanics. We're not AMPs, but we are just sharing our experiences here. Let's see. Is there anything else, gentlemen, for the good of the order that we need to bring up?
No. I just want to thank everybody. The chat's been really awesome tonight. And
it's a big group tonight. We've had quite a few people in there. It seems like the number's a little bit higher. So we're happy
we went a little bit
that.
long, but thanks for enduring with us.
Yeah. So would you like tonight's bit of wisdom? And it's directly fuel related.
Great.
There is only one time you have too much fuel on board your airplane. Do you know when that is? When you're on fire.
That's right.
That is the only time you have too much fuel.
Yeah.
With that, closing out episode 111 of the Midlife Pilot Podcast. Good night, everybody.